Great. So there we have it.
So
So Randy, I can actually how's my sound?
your
Okay.
sound is great. Yep.
It's great to see you. I'm just gonna
Oh yeah.
start off by almost speaking to the camera to say like this is my first time ever interviewing somebody.
Oh,
Yeah. So I had Father Calvin Robinson on the list for last week, and he's like a prominent internet somebody. And unfortunately he had to cancel to travel. And you are the second person I had on the list. So thank you.
would you like me to turn my collar around?
Oh, please. Yeah. That no. So, anyways, yeah. So I don't know who would will watch this. Maybe somebody for posterity's sake, but for that sake, I'll say thank you and welcome.
Thank you. It's really good to see you.
It's great to see you too, Randy. The only problem is the interview auspices kind of like I don't want them to change the dynamic of our conversation. So maybe it's not good to interview even introduce it that way. So
As you like. I have. It's going to be just exciting to talk to you, and it'll probably just become that.
okay, that's it. So Randy, I wanted to start off. I met you at ARC and just an incredible time in Britain. And you intrigued me from so many different angles. But like I wanted to start off, could you tell me a bit about like where you're from, your childhood, like the what's the Randy story? Because I think it's gonna have a lot of impact.
Okay. So I was born in 1955. The first president I remember is John F. Kennedy. The I was born just outside of Boston in Newton, Massachusetts. I had two great parents, and 2 years later, my little brother Scott came. He's the smart brother, and we, I want to. So as I got older, and I would call home whenever whoever picked up the phone, the other one would say, "Land or Sonny, Randy's on the phone," and it'd always be both of them. And as a married couple, they were like two wire hangers in a closet. They just so stuck together, and they were very different, but so together that I was really raised by great parents, and they they took us to museums, they took us to historical sites, they took us hiking, they took us swimming, they took us sailing and boating and fishing, and that's kind of how we grew up.
It sounds it sounds idyllic. You had an like a not too much drama, not too much what would you
Yeah,
say is the most dramatic thing that happened to you in growing up in that Leave It to Beaver scenario?
this is crazy, and I don't even remember this situation. My next door neighbor, who was 2 years older than me, could do something that I couldn't do. I don't re even remember what it was. And my feeling was one day I'm going to grow up and play the saxophone. And well, actually, in college, my roommate had a saxophone and he lent it to me. And I went down to the laundry room in the basement to practice. And then I thought maybe I was just good enough to go outside and away from the hot washers and dryers. So I sat in the back of the dorm and I sat on a wall and started to play. And before I know it, I felt my best friends were throwing tomatoes at me. And that was the end of my saxophone career. I guess that was the end of the drama.
Yeah, fair enough. Did you pursue music anymore past that?
Oh, I have no talent.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I have no talent. I have very little artistic talent. When I draw on the board, I'm terrible. And I explain to my students, this is why I'm a scientist.
Yeah. So how did you end up like you're into biology and now physics? What was the first clue for you? Like, how did the interest start? How did the gravity pull you there?
Oh, so I love nature. I really love, so we loved hiking and being outside all the time. And And then when I was in, my father's also a photographer, and he brought his old chemicals home, and we developed pictures in the basement and developed film and learned all about that. When I was in high school, I did stage lighting, and I absolutely loved doing stage lighting. Um, I was hoping that I would end up working with Chipmunk, lighting rock and roll bands. But I went to college. I actually started as a theater major, but the I was like the lighting designer in high school, and in college, the undergraduates just changed sets, and I wasn't willing to wait that long, and I wasn't willing to go to New York City either. And then I kind of thought, I really want to have a family, and probably lighting rock and roll bands is not quite the thing I want to do. So my other interest, which was nature, um, I took up and went into science, botany, actually. I actually knew nothing about botany. Um, I don't know even know if I knew that word. Um, when I took a human physiology course, and I absolutely loved it. So I was looking for another physiology course, and there was one on plant physiology. Who knew plants had physiology? So Bernie Rubenstein was teaching it, and the first day in class, he's introduced himself and said, "You know, I don't like teaching, but I have to for this job so I can do my research. But it turns out I'm a good teacher, so you guys will probably like this." And then he went on and started teaching. I can't remember the specific subject, but he taught us the history of how we knew what we knew and what kind of experiments were done. And I just fell in love with that way of teaching. And then at the end of the class, he said, "Well, this class is oversubscribed, so all botany majors anybody who's not a botany major has to leave."
Hmm.
So I went up to him and I said, "You know, I'm actually not even planning to graduate college at this point." And I really don't I'm not committed to any major, but I wouldn't mind being a botany major to take this class. And he said, "No, you can't be in this class." And so I said, "I'm going to do everything I can to get in this class." And he said, "I'm going to do everything I can to keep you out of this class." And I went down to the administration building, which was called Whitmore, but we called it Witless. And I said to the ladies there, "Could you make me a botany major by Friday at 12:20 when the next class met?" So all the ladies came over and said, "Why?" And actually, I gave them my long history of finishing high school, not planning to go to college. I had applied to UMass. My mother wrote an acceptance, said I accepted it, but she didn't tell me. I traveled cross country with my friend Rick for 3 months.
Wait, your
He
your
had,
mother accepted a college offer without you
yes,
knowing it
right.
on your behalf and
Yes,
signed your name.
yes. I don't know what she signed. And I guess you probably signed the check, which I think was $359 back then.
Chunk of
I
change.
think a semester, but maybe a year. And yeah, so we traveled around the country. My friend Rick had to come back to go to Goddard College. So I came back with him, but I was going to go back on the road. And I said to my mother, you know, we stopped at some colleges on the way, and I think I'd like to go. I don't want to graduate or anything, but take a few courses. And she said, "I knew you'd change your mind. So I already paid your tuition."
Hmm.
And that next week I was up there. So I told this story to the ladies behind the counter, and they made me a botany major before Friday at 12:20. And I got in that class, and I stayed as a botany major. Later in grad school, I TA'd for Bernie, and he also taught my research as my research progressed, and it became a very, very good relationship. I guess the last time we saw each other was 2019. So we
Okay,
still keep in touch, but it's been a while.
that's incredible. And so, have you've been teaching botany now for several decades?
Yes.
Like how many?
So I've been at Cornell for 37 years.
Hmm. And so over your 37 years in botany, have you sometimes we get like mountaintop moments, right? Where you make a
Yes.
discovery or you see something. If what would you say like, and these are kind of, the broad big questions, the 30-second CEO elevator questions, right? But what in your journey, like what are you proud of? What's a good story? What sticks out for you in your journey?
Well, there's actually a number of things. I think I've been pretty lucky. I got my PhD with Peter Hepler, who was quite a scientist, human being, um, wonderful all-around person. And I started working on a project on how fern spores respond to light, sense light, and respond to light. So the spores are dormant, and then they become activated, and they undergo cell division. So these particular spores had been pretty well studied, and what was known was phytochrome was not the photoreceptor, and the spores didn't need any ions to develop. So the first thing I showed was phytochrome was the photoreceptor.
Hmm.
So it just had to figure out how to use how to get the cells sensitive by keeping them in the cold and the dark for a while. So there was 0% germination and um, enough sensitivity to look at phytochrome and give short, bright pulses that you could then of light, so you can tell that phytochrome was the photoreceptor. It was red, far red, reversible. It's a very interesting photoreceptor. It acts as a switch. If you give it red light, it turns the cells on. If you give it far red light, which is like 730 nanometers, it shuts them off, and you can keep reversing those. So I showed something that was against what was the previous knowledge. And then I also showed that because the cell wall around the spore has all these negative charges, it holds on to a lot of calcium. So in order to show that calcium ions are required for germination, you have to remove all the calcium that's there with a calcium buffer, and then add back various amounts. And by doing that, you could see that micromolar calcium was required for germination.
Hmm.
And in that thesis, I showed red light stimulates those cells by being absorbed by phytochrome and then allowing calcium to flow into the cell.
Oh, very
And
interesting.
yeah, it was so. I mean, I truly have respect for people doing science, but I don't necessarily accept all conclusions as being true.
Well, that is
We're
science, right?
yeah, I would say.
Like
Yeah.
science is another word for observation, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So if anybody says
Yeah.
trust the truth of science, like it's a kind of an oxymoron.
Yeah, I do a whole thing with my class. I show them all the t-shirts and signs like believe the science.
Yeah.
And yeah, they pretty much are disabused of that.
Yeah. Science isn't political at all. Science is study. And well, it's been highly politicized, right?
Yeah. Too highly politicized. I think the National Association in America and the United States, the National Association of National Center for Science Education talks about climate change and evolution, that there's no controversy whatsoever, and any controversies are political.
Hmm.
So I haven't yet taught climate change. That's in 2 weeks in my class, but I have taught evolution, and in fact, I do throughout. Um, I give a
Now here
lecture.
we've hit like a juxtaposition, right? You're a Christian professor teaching evolution.
Right.
So how I have this is a great question. How do those two traditionally opposing ideologies fit in your brain?
Good question. So I want to tell you about this lecture, and it will
Sure.
show you that um, nobody should be too dogmatic. Okay. So the lecture is entitled Charles Darwin, Samuel Wilberforce, and How We See the Color of Ants.
Okay, that's
Okay.
intriguing.
So Samuel Wilberforce wrote a review in 1860 on the origin of species. And he starts it out, nobody like Charles Darwin explains the interaction between species the way he does. And I'm going to give you some examples he talks about, but let me tell you, I'm not going to agree with his conclusions. And so he starts out and talks about red clover. So red clover has a very deep um, pistil. So you need a insect with a long proboscis to fertilize it. And that insect is the humblebee. So what we know as the bumblebee used to be called the humblebee until
Like
about
humble,
19.
like humility.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah. So if you look up Darwin, you'll read about the humblebee. And but Beatrix Potter made it go buzz and then called it the bumblebee.
interesting.
But pre-1900, it was the humblebee. So the humblebee pollinates the pistil. And so if there's plenty of humblebees, then there's plenty of red clover. But if there's mice that will eat the humblebee's nests, then there won't be enough humblebees and there won't be enough pollination of red clover. So red clover will decline. Well, if it's near the city, there'll be enough cats to eat the mice. So there'll be plenty of humblebees and then plenty of red clover. So Wilberforce repeats, actually quotes Darwin in a number of instances like this with his interactions between species, with uh, ants and aphids, all kinds of beautiful stories, really beautiful, beautiful stories. And then he goes in and talks about the slave-making instinct of ants. And I don't know if you knew that ants have a slave-making instinct. And no matter what color the master ants are, the slaves are always black.
Huh.
So now in 1860, this is an interesting issue in England about the slave-making instinct of ants. Now, Darwin wanted to get rid of psychology and have it replaced by biology. So in essence, all our instincts to for survival would be our
So he
psychology.
wanted to put a pin in nature versus nurture. Done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's too simple because it's the
Yes.
interaction with nature.
Yeah.
But he wanted to say that there was, let's say, nothing immaterial
Okay.
that controlled us. So so if in fact we're somewhat evolved from the ants, then we would have a slave-making instinct. So Wilberforce was a little worried about this. Now Wilberforce went through this. He wasn't going to let him be bothered by his own deep feelings. He wanted to look at the scientific evidence. So, did the fossil record show a linear relationship between species for evolution? And he presented the evidence and said, no, it doesn't. You have a species here and something here and something here. And Darwin, in The Origin of Species, confirms that, yes, it's not linear. He certainly wishes it would be. And perhaps if we, do some more digging, we find the linear relationships, although we haven't till this day. He also said that, can you produce one new species, where we have progression to a new species? Because Wilberforce didn't think progress was the way to describe nature, but compensation. So, for example, he looked at the historical records for dogs and rock pigeons and cats, which have been kept for thousands of years. And he said, you know, if you breed a dog to be very fast, it won't be very strong. Or if you breed it to be very strong, it will be slow. So there's all this compensation. That's really the rule of nature, not progression, not progress. And and if you take all the different dogs and you interbreed them, they'll sort of go back to the basic species. They'll lose their specialness of each breed. Same with rock pigeons and cats. So he didn't really think there was evidence for progression, for progress. There was more evidence for compensation. And to this day, we don't know because we haven't seen a new species pop up.
Hmm. That's
And
always seems to me simplicity, like from a simplistic perspective. That's pretty damning evidence, though.
okay, let's not say it's damning evidence. Let's say you can look at it two ways,
Okay.
which actually Charles Dickens wrote a couple long, long articles on natural selections and species. So what is a species is not isn't something that's set. For animals, we say if it can't interbreed or has the same skeletal structure, um, so the same a species has the same skeletal structure and can interbreed with itself, but not with other things. But there's there's a little bit of interpretation that goes with those things. And so how you outline a species isn't always unquestionable.
So I could lay it down, like land it a little bit. And again, this is simplistic, but it'll give a little bit of point of reference. Do you believe in that traditional evolution as described by Darwin is factual?
All right, let me go on.
Okay.
Okay, so there's two ways of looking at the world. Decandolle, who Darwin quotes, said, nature's constantly at war. And if you wanted to, you could go outside, not you and not me, but we can understand people go outside and say, is it just a war out there? Nature's red in tooth and claw. And you can also go outside, and this would describe you and me, and say, it's unbelievably beautiful. There's just it's been a gift to us to be on this earth. Okay. And in some respects, we do not know for certain which one of those is more true. I mean, I know what I believe, but okay. So the person that co-founded evolution by natural selection, Alfred Russel Wallace, he didn't believe that evolution by natural selection applied to humans because he felt that when we saw things, we saw the real beauty in them that had nothing to do with survival. That we understood math in a way that had nothing to do with survival. We could appreciate music in a way that had nothing to do with survival. So, as he describes it, evolution by natural selection can describe the land grabber, but not these people who we admire. And one of the people he admired at the time was Florence Nightingale,
Hmm.
who helped so many people. So when you go out and to your own detriment, helping people, your own risk, that person can't be described by evolution by natural selection. So those people who we
So
admire,
evolution doesn't have any room for altruism and love.
it doesn't. People will say it does, but it's I don't believe they're
I
talking
agree.
those things.
I don't see that there's any room in any way for altruism with evolution because it would mean that the only gauge for any individual's actions would be on the reciprocation of those actions if evolution was true.
Yeah, that's right.
There'd be no true friendship.
There'd be no truth.
Not, oh yeah. Oh
It
wait, no, no,
would,
no. I don't want to agree so quickly to that. What do you mean
okay.
by that?
No truth.
Yeah.
All right. So I believe one gift that we as humans have been given is the desire, the sense of truth, and the desire to know truth.
Mhm.
And but if you're just trying to have more kids, basically, truth doesn't help that. So it's something that wouldn't be selected for by natural selection. In fact, Darwin also said this, I don't know if I should trust my mind, because if my mind was developed to just essentially survive, have more kids, and not for the truth, how can I trust it in telling me what's true?
Love it.
Yeah. Darwin's actually reading Darwin. It's not it's long and it's not real fast reading, but he's a very thoughtful person. Also, he and his wife, Emma, had the same grandfather, Josiah Wedgwood.
Interesting.
And probably there was too much inbreeding in his kids. And his favorite daughter, Annie, died when she was young.
Hmm.
And when I read Darwin, I think when he says, I just can't believe there's a benevolent God, which is how we started like this segment. You could look at nature as always at war.
Hmm.
Um, I think Darwin had that. And for that, I truly feel sorry for him that he had that experience and took away that lesson that there wouldn't be a benevolent God.
His worldview was dark.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And actually, T.H. Huxley, when he was older and he gave the Romanes lecture, he said that for knowing what's right and wrong cannot be described by evolution, by natural selection. It's just completely, in fact, the opposite.
Yeah. Now we're into moral compass, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then he went on and told a friend that his love of music lets him know that there has to be more than evolution by natural selection.
Mm. Yeah.
Okay, so if we look at evolution strictly as just defined as a change over time, okay, so you have evolved from your parents and your kids have evolved from you. There's clearly you don't confuse each other,
Hmm.
you know, with each other.
But
So
but I have to say a broad application of the term, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So if we just say there is change,
Yes.
then we can say, okay, what are the mechanisms that allow that change? So if I said to you, we had a country that was invaded and everybody that couldn't swim across the channel was going to get killed, you can understand that we would end up with a group of citizens that were good swimmers
Yes.
compared to before. So
But if you
natural,
take that same country and
yes,
told them they all had to grow a third arm,
right.
that's where it gets a bit janky for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. So I want to say there's places where evolution by natural selection, we can understand it and it will work.
Yes.
Now, the best example of evolution by natural selection is the peppered moths in England, the white moths that became black moths during the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
So they couldn't hide in the trees anymore as white moths, and the birds would eat them. So the white ones died down and the black ones came. Once the air quality was cleaned, the moths went back to white.
Interesting.
Okay, so it was not an irreversible species
Hmm.
creation of a species. It was in essence compensation.
Yes.
And that is actually the best evidence for origin for a real-time dynamic.
So evolution isn't like an expansive worldview for you. It's you're more of just describing an aspect of what you see.
No, that's right. It's not an expansive worldview, but it's
Yeah.
an aspect. And I
Well, there's
think it's
people
something
who
that's,
are self-coined evolutionists who use the evolutionary doctrine to determine everything that they perceive, right?
that's right.
Yeah, and for me, like I can't fit in that. I'm too open-handed with what I believe. So,
Yes. I want to talk about another thing. There's Richard Owen believed that large congenital changes would contribute to a change in a species. And nowadays we know of things called transcription factors. So a single protein coded by a single gene that could have many, many effects. And Richard Goldsmith described these many, many effects as creating a hopeful monster, something that would be a different species. Um, I believe those things can happen too, that you can have these quantal or these discrete changes instead of a gradualism. Darwin only believed in gradualism because if the finger of God went in, you'd have a big change. So he repeated Leibniz by saying nature doesn't do anything in jumps.
hmm
And but I believe those jumps can happen and you could create some things that are very different.
do you think
We don't know
Darwin?
if it,
Sorry, do you think Darwin was he agnostic?
he was agnostic and he wrote that in his autobiography.
Okay, very good. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually Huxley was a Calvinist. And he was sort of against the Anglican Church because if you weren't an Anglican, you didn't get a job. So that was his battle, but he was a Christian.
Interesting.
Oh, and T.H. Huxley, son is Leonard Huxley, whose sons are Aldous Huxley,
Oh my goodness.
yeah, Julian Huxley, and Andrew Fielding Huxley. Julian Huxley was population geneticist and eugenicist. Andrew Fielding Huxley, who's actually one of my favorite scientists, discovered how nerves pass action potentials and won the Nobel Prize for that. So Aldous Huxley actually knew science very, very well.
Hmm.
His great uncle on his mother's side was Matthew Arnold, who knew literature very well. And he had these two lines that created Aldous Huxley.
I have to go back to the evolution perspective again. So with in your mind, evolution is just a factor that exists as a an aspect of our reality here in every species, and that is the ability to change within parameters of our species.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
cool.
So when it comes to human beings, all right, I mean, we want, if you're going to play basketball, being really tall is important. I mean, there's physical factors um that we look at and admire and want. But there's something about being human that is non-physical
hmm
and non-material. And it's the real and it has to do with that love that you were talking about and
And as a man of science,
conscious. What's that?
oh, I'm sorry.
Things like our conscience,
Yeah.
you know, it's not something that would be selected for by natural selection, but it sets aside like people you admire and people you might not admire.
hmm
And so evolution by natural selection has nothing to say about how, for example, conscience gets there, the idea of right or wrong, um, how to behave. That has nothing to do with procreating.
Now, how did you like a man like very scientific in everything that you go about? How did you end up finding faith? Because that's not a common, it's more common for me to run into men like you who are agnostic.
Yeah. So that project I told you about that I did in grad school, looking at how light activates cells. When I went to my first plant physiology meeting, I figured everybody would know everybody there would know everything about the quantum nature of light. So I taught myself physics so I would be able to converse with them. Turns out nobody knew about the quantum nature of light. But in the meantime, I learned physics. And because I was never good at math, uh, I had to like sneak up on the math. And one way that I snuck on up on the math is I read autobiographies of scientists where they were describing what they were doing, or the history where physics was involved, particularly Los Alamos and the development of the bomb. And little by little, I learned physics. I think I ended up actually learning physics quite well that
Hmm.
way. And and I could see this underlying level at the, say, subatomic level or the level of laws that went all through nature, through atoms and plants and animals and us and all of nature. And I just, frankly, what I saw was a beautiful design and a rational design in all of nature. So
Even as you were speaking, Randy, in my head, I saw like it was like Randy saw the sine wave of reality, right? Through everything.
that's right. That's as a matter of fact, I'm just working on a project now, and
Oh, it's
just
wonderful.
2 minutes before we started talking,
Yeah, let's
I
see.
just
You're looking at the orbits of your electrons and around a photon or whatnot.
yeah, I'm writing a paper called "What's Wrong with Maxwell's Equations,"
Oh, wow. Just the
and so and actually, I got to tell you, I love Maxwell. I think he's
yeah.
probably the second best scientist that's ever lived,
Who's the
and
first?
of course that Newton, no doubt about it.
Newton.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So actually tonight I'm presenting to our life group Daniel chapter 12.
Oh, very good.
And I don't know if you know it, but Newton wrote a book on Daniel,
I didn't.
his observations on Daniel, which I'll bring in.
Okay, cool. Please.
So so let's see. So I saw this beautiful design, but in essence, there was no personal God involved.
Mm,
There was just you got call him God the artist, God the architect, God the mathematician, God the scientist, but it wasn't a personal God. And but I truly believed in God. I realized this just didn't come out of nowhere.
absolutely.
And I remember in when Jimmy Carter and Reagan were running for president, and those are the days you could talk about politics no matter what. And Jimmy Carter was the first person I voted for. I was extremely happy to vote for Carter. I was very excited. He won, and I thought he was a terrible president. And I actually became a Reagan Democrat at that point.
Hmm.
And I voted for Reagan. I remember sitting on the bus next to Mary Lopez, another graduate student. She said, "How can you vote for Reagan? He believes in creation." And to this day, it's one of the biggest non sequiturs I ever heard. Um, to me, it was, I mean, irrelevant, but I just didn't know why I would even bother somebody. And and then the
What just because at the time it was non sequitur for what reasons?
I mean, I had never heard that. I mean, I thought you would vote for somebody due to their
Oh,
policies.
I understand.
You
Yeah.
know, I mean, if you were voting for somebody to create a world, I can understand if they believed in creation or something. It just seemed to have nothing to do with anything.
Yeah.
So the next thing was Amy gave me a Bible, and this is around 1990. And so I grew up Jewish, but we were basically culturally Jewish, which meant eat delicious food for holidays. My mother was a great cook. Actually, she could cook any ethnic food, but I was happy to eat Jewish food. And and we learned about the Holocaust. And that was basically what it meant to be Jewish, have family dinners with great food and know about the Holocaust. And then when I read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, I realized that I never learned about the prophets. I never knew really what we sort of learned Genesis and Exodus sort of because of the holidays, but then we never learned anything else. And I saw what the prophets were saying. It was like, you're not kind of keeping this covenant, and you're not keeping this covenant. Yeah, 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 yeah. And okay, we're going to capture you and take you to Babylon. And yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, and then when I got to the New Testament, I realized that it was the fulfillment of the Old Testament. And and I just felt a sense of truth there that that came from reading that. And at the same time, the like the Gulf War was going on, so the history of the Middle East was going there, and I realized that the Bible just wasn't a bunch of myths and fairy stories, but was historically accurate. So I could begin to build on that
That
and
same
take it
connecting
seriously.
that same connecting wave that you saw through photonics and
Yeah.
physics and biology, I see right through the truth of the Bible.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm an amateur scientist. I'll call myself that. As an amateur scientist, I've delved into the science of the Bible, and it blows my mind every single time.
Well, tell me something.
I came to my faith because I kept on getting shut down. Like very basically in my early or not mid 30s, when I was raging against Christians and wanted nothing to do with morality. I thought, okay, the easiest way is to just disprove that Jesus Christ was actually alive. And to my chagrin, I found out that he's the most like articulated historical figure in history. And if you actually want to verify somebody's a reality based on how many records of that person exists, Jesus exists more than you and I today. The Romans recorded census. We conduct census here in North America like twice a decade or whatnot, right? Census in the Roman era was every time a man or a woman left or exited or entered a village or a town. So Jesus left a footprint of records all over the place, and that was just one of many that I didn't get into. But I'm always blown away by the reality of the Bible. And for that exact reason, too, you are like a bit of a treasure for me because, like, I have such a hard time with Genesis, right? Because the creation of the world is a very challenging, it doesn't fit into my little brain.
Yeah, so Amy and I see this differently. She sees the Bible literally in terms of 7 days.
Okay.
Um, I see it more in terms of 13.8 billion years.
Okay.
But th those are just numbers. Okay, like I said, I wasn't so good at math. I'm willing to be wrong on a number. I give my students, when I talk about the origin of life and the origin of the universe, I give them an empty tray. I say, I would like you to create a universe. Please, you have 5 minutes, raise your hand when you're done. And they kind of look at me funny. And I say, maybe I should really give you 6 days. But and then everybody's kind of laughing. And I said, well, if we did this every day for a week, do you think somebody would create a universe? No. How about if we got 7 billion people do this experiment? Do you think we'd create a universe? No. How about if they did it every day for a week? No. I said, have you ever seen matter create itself? No. Anybody here give birth to themselves? No. All right, so there's two scientific laws that can describe the origin of the universe. One, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, we can get something from nothing for a certain amount of time. And the other one is the first law of thermodynamics, as stated by James Joule. Energy cannot be created or destroyed except by the creator. So actually, the people that wrote the first and second law of thermodynamics were very religious and wrote the creator in it.
Oh. I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. So James Joule and Lord Kelvin, you can, it's great. It makes great reading. Lord Kelvin goes on about the second law of thermodynamics. It's, and he was Scottish too, and a Presbyterian. It's like our job not to waste too much.
Hmm.
Um, but let's see. Um, where is that coming from here?
I'm not sure. We followed a few different
Yeah.
roads.
Yeah. So, oh
Oh, you're
yeah.
talking about the
So,
creation of
oh
the
yeah,
universe a week
the
at a time.
creation of the universe.
Yeah.
So, I'd say to my students, so nobody know, I wasn't there, they actually, at that point, they wondered, maybe I was there at the beginning of the universe, but I tell them I wasn't. And we have these two scientific ideas that are mutually exclusive. As a matter of fact, I bring a rug and a broom and say the most important scientific instrument is the rug and the broom. So you could sweep these inconsistencies under the rug and say, believe the science. Um, so, and I don't care. Actually, I do care, but I tell them I don't care which one they choose. It's up to them because it took a long time for my journey, and I'm happy to just encourage their journey so they come to the truth at some point.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
So, so both Amy and I believe that matter cannot create itself, that God had to create the universe, and there seems to be some places that he was more involved than other places for me. Now, Amy thinks he's involved with every lipid that's moving around in a membrane.
Okay.
Um, I figure he makes the laws for these things,
Yeah.
and he's more creative for bigger things. But so there's a lot of room. I respect what she says. Like I said, um, I don't know which one is actually true, but I don't have to beat her to
No,
into
and those are
submission, nor she does, neither does she for me.
yeah, no, and they're
So
deep topics. And nobody, if you're trying to be right about any of this, you're wrong.
yeah, yeah.
I
So
have a
so and another thing that two colleagues and I wrote a chapter in a book about whether laws of physics and chemistry can describe light. So I mean life. So we met in a room. Carl said yes. Tom said yes. I said no, and they looked at me. And I brought up Laplace's demon. So Laplace said if you have a super intellect and it knew all the positions and all the velocities of every atom in the world, it could predict everything. So everything would be determined. And
no.
what's that?
I said nope.
So people use that. So actually, I'm going to say that's true.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to say that's true. So people use that um, example to
Yep.
say that, as a matter of fact, supposedly Napoleon asked Laplace, "Do you have where does God fit in there?" And Laplace supposedly said, "I have no need for that hypothesis."
Oh, wow.
But actually, there is. So you have the differential equation that takes in the positions and the momentum and tells you what's going to happen. But that differential equation has an infinite number of solutions. In other words, you get no information by just having the differential equation. You have to set boundary conditions. You have to say, I know that this is where they all start, or these are the velocities
Hmm.
and stuff like that. So those boundary conditions are immaterial. They're information. So the equations themselves aren't enough. You need somebody to set the scene, and then everything could follow. I believe in free will
Yeah,
and
that was
whatever.
my
Yeah.
crux was free will. I didn't think about the immaterial boundaries. Huh.
Yeah, so free will, I just accept that as a given. I'm the only one of my colleagues who believes in free will.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. Although I think they must,
Are
but
any of the are you the only Christian in the group?
no, but I'm the only one probably that puts God first in the explanations.
Hmm. Well, I think that's kind of what we're supposed to do in all things.
Yeah, so um, I wrote a cell biology book, and Princeton University Press was going to publish it, and the editors changed. One retired, and the new one came, and the new one said you can't put the word God in a science book. And I said, I have to. In everything, I describe the relationship of the parts to the whole. And that's just the description of the biggest whole possible. Even if you don't believe in God,
Hmm.
it just says this is the biggest. So no, you can't put the word God in a science textbook. And actually, alls I had was the textbook's very mathematical, which I told you I'm not very good at, and physical. And I just want to say, although I'm so mechanistic, I'm not going to give God as any particular cause for anything, but I don't want to eliminate him. And I quoted a letter that Galileo had written to somebody about that there's the book of nature and the Bible, and you should be familiar with both things. That's what he didn't like. I said, well, if you won't let me put the word God in, we're going to have to break the contract. In fact, we broke two contracts, one for that and one for my light microscopy book, where it started, God created, in the beginning, God created light and saw that it was good. And so I broke two contracts. I remember looking at myself and saying, this is me? This is me breaking a contract over including the word God or not. And but it was like, yeah, that is you. And that's probably when I realized that all these different thoughts that I'd been thinking about the beautiful design and a personal God was something that was really incorporated inside me.
Hmm. So there's two types of light then, the uncreated
Yes,
light and the created light.
that's right.
And he must have created the created light in his image. I've often theorized that this is our existence, our reality here is a photonic matrix, is a holographic matrix. I think if we break down all of our elements, we're going to find photons. What do you think of that?
I think there's okay. Um, if we moved everything backwards to the Big Bang before there was any matter, all the matter that we know of in an antimatter came from the electromagnetic force. So in some respects, it's interchangeable.
Yes.
So whether whether or not that's a productive way of looking at it, I
Hmm.
don't know.
Okay, fair enough.
But it may be. That's I talked to I gave that seminar, and I said God created light and said it was good, and I said okay, for me I want to be a little more mechanistic about what is light, and so I want to be a little more mechanistic
Specific.
than a photonic universe. At this point, I need more parts.
I kind of had a crazy idea the other day and I wanted to run it by you today if that's okay.
Sure.
We talked about sine waves, right? Have you seen when they do like on a two-dimensional on a flat plane surface, they have like a sine wave generator and they create the sine patterns of the different frequencies?
On a two-dimensional surface,
So like they'll
like
take
a
like a plane,
Chiladi plate.
something like that. Yeah, it's just, I forget the proper term, but they put frequency through it and it creates the different patterns at the different frequency levels. Are you familiar with this?
It doesn't look like a sine wave in particular, but
No, it doesn't. I'm
yeah,
wrong.
okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's another
okay,
word for it,
yeah.
but it creates a pattern,
You see the
and
patterns, yes,
yeah,
the
and
periodic
we
patterns.
we see these patterns in architecture and all over in all of nature, right? What I wanted to ask you about Is your like right now you're talking about like measuring the wavelength frequency of a photon by measuring the orbit of its electron. Am I correct?
It's semi-photons.
Semi-photons, I'm sorry. If you looked at that from, so like I'm always thinking, I have pictures in my head always, so I see three-dimensional balls floating around and orbiting each other. But then if you look at that like if the photon was coming directly at you, and you could see the orbit, right, of that would create a pattern that reminds me of these sign patterns. And I
That's
was
right.
and I was always curious is if we could take a top-down look at our solar system. And so you have the different orbits of the different planets in pattern, right? Technically, like, am I crazy, or would the orbits of the planets around our sun give our solar system technically like a frequency?
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know if they all I doubt they all would have the same frequency, but or periods
Well, I don't even
of
mean same, but
square,
I mean
but
like our solar system as a whole, with all the patterns of orbit around
yeah.
our sun. If you could take it in a box and measure it, it may have a single distinct frequency.
Oh,
Or
yeah, you
I'm just too far out on the science fiction.
I don't know about a single frequency, but there'd be like series in a Fourier series for each frequency that would come together. So just like a violin and a guitar or in a piano, you play the same note,
It would be an orchestra.
but yeah, you'd
Yeah.
hear the different sounds that make up that
Which is
note.
actually kind of a segue to my new invention is the multi-ring gyroscopic electromagnetic orchestrator. I want to experiment with the integration of different magnetic frequencies. I still don't know if it's going to work though.
Well, I'll be looking forward to hearing about it.
Yeah, me too. So now I are you okay for time right now?
Yes.
Cool. I want like one little bit more. You're getting into photons and light, right? So what's your like? I just got to know you this year, Andy, and you seem to be always learning, and I expect that's who you are. So what right now is exciting you about learning about light? Why are you engaging in this direction?
So I am actually looking for that design. And I'm not talking about a theory of everything, but I'm talking about a coherent at the level of light, I want to make things coherent. So I told him writing a paper called What's Wrong with Maxwell's
Yes.
Equations. So Faraday showed that if he moved a magnet in a coil, it would generate a current. And Ampere showed if he had a current going through a wire, it would generate a magnetic field. And those are basically the two main equations in Maxwell's equations. And the other two, Maxwell set to be zero. That's the divergence of B equals zero, which should be zero because we haven't found a magnet that's only a North Pole or only a South Pole. So by having it zero means there's no sources and sinks, that you have complete circuits from north to south. You can't just have a north or just a south. The other is the divergence of E equals zero, which means that there was no source or sink of charge. And since light isn't bent by electric field, that made sense. But since light is the carrier of the electromagnetic field, it doesn't necessarily, the electromagnetic force, it doesn't necessarily make sense. So I went back to see how he derived his equations. What he should have done was put an I, an imaginary number, between the electric field and the magnetic field. And what the I is, essentially, it's a 90-degree rotation or a quarter of a wavelength rotation to say one thing happens a quarter of a cycle after the other thing. So I'm rewriting Maxwell's equations by saying if Maxwell's equations are right, then special relativity is wrong, for example, because nothing can happen instantaneously. If Maxwell's equations are right,
Oh,
then
that's an interesting perspective.
except I don't believe in special relativity, so that's just a. But I'll mention that because since everybody else does, and the other thing is if they're instantaneous, there's no cause and effect relationship between magnetism and electricity. So, and also, if both the electric and magnetic fields are in phase like this, then the energy is not there, and then it's there, and then it's not there, and then it's there. So it doesn't follow conservation of energy either. So the only thing
Well,
we
did you
have
just
to,
argue that wave formation doesn't follow conservation of energy?
according to the Maxwell's equations, the way he drew it in his paper.
So you're just blowing the doors off reality.
So what he did was what you have to do is make his equations um, conform to reality.
Hmm.
So that's what I'm doing. So instead of having the electric and magnetic field in phase like he does, I have them a quarter of a wavelength out of phase. And when you do that, energy is conserved, cause and effect is respected. And so then I'm showing right now what that sine cosine wave I just showed you was talking about what happens at an antenna that when you're going to now give off electromagnetic waves and redo the math on that. So what we have now is the position and the position of an electron and the acceleration of that electron antenna is going to give off electromagnetic field. So the position and the acceleration have the same sinusoidal form. So if one's a sine, the other's a sine. And I'm showing, well, it's not exactly the acceleration, it's the velocity which changes like this. So the position and the velocity, one's a sine, the other's a cosine, or one's a cosine, the other's a sine. So they're quarter wavelength out of phase. And so I'm making it so something's visible. So for example, if you have an electron moving in an antenna, when it gets to the end, the velocity stops, and then it speeds up again, and then stops, and then speeds up again. So in the middle, it's fastest. So the magnetic field, which is related to the velocity, is greatest when it's in the middle, zero at the end, greatest again, zero. But the electric field is greatest when you have the two charges separated. If you have them both together, then there's no charge, no field. So as you separate them, you get the greatest field. So the functional form for the electric and magnetic fields based on the visual picture of an electron, a quarter wavelength out of phase.
Hmm.
Um, so everybody knows that in terms of antennas. Then you do this kind of fake math to find out that they would be in phase if you cancel out all the other terms. But there's no need to. It's arbitrary.
Now, how like how will this affect I don't know, academia or even the world if your postulate is more correct than Maxwell's?
Oh, so Maxwell's equations are also not consistent with the Kirchhoff diffraction integral. So the Kirchhoff diffraction integral describes all optics, all microscopes, telescopes, how image formation works. Um, and it's just not consistent with Maxwell's equations.
Hmm.
But it works.
Hmm.
It just works. So and however, if you change Maxwell's equations to be consistent with my binary photon, then it's consistent with Kirchhoff's
Whoa, whoa,
diffraction.
whoa. Binary
Oh,
photon.
yeah.
Is that the
So
term?
actually, I usually say binary because I think it sounds better, but a
Oh,
friend of mine says I should say binary. That's what everybody says. That's what I said today for the first time.
oh, cool. When will this paper be out?
The Maxwell one.
Hmm.
I told the journal I was hoping to get it done by May 1st.
Very good. What journal are you hoping to publish in?
It's called Photonics.
Oh, pretty straightforward.
Mm, yeah.
Well,
Since my kind of work doesn't get funding, and they sent me a letter that said, if you like, we'll waive the publishing charges if you like to publish with us. So I took them up on it.
that's amazing. If kind of like pivot a little bit, um, I've started getting more involved personally with the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, ARC. When what do you think of ARC in general? Like, what's your thoughts on it after we've kind of landed now?
I love being there. I mean, it was so I love the whole idea of personal responsibility and as opposed to the World Economic Forum. I like the idea of personal responsibility as an educator. So everybody should take personal responsibility of what they believe to be true. And I'm not saying that everybody has a different truth. I think there's an objective truth, and we're working towards that. But everybody should take the responsibility to find that truth and not just delegate it out to some authority or some consensus.
Hmm.
The the Royal Society's motto is nullius in verba, don't take anybody's word for it. And today science is basically taught, if the consensus says it's true, don't question it.
Political science.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, no, I feel the
So
same way.
my little small part of the world is education and the whole idea of personal responsibility in education to teach each student that, to teach them the skills, him or her the skills to critically think, to understand what is true, to understand that there is a truth, nobody knows it, and how you approach it. I tell my students the first day of class, don't believe anything I say. I'm going to give you enough. When I first said it, it was just a throwaway line, but um, but it turned out that they really just resonate with it because for their educational life, they've been just told to memorize, turn bullet points from a PowerPoint into test points and just memorize without questioning it.
Mhm.
So if I tell my students, if I tell you this sweater's red, and then I give you a test, there's one question on the test. What color is my sweater? What are you going to write? 95% of students will write red.
Mhm.
And I think learning and understanding what reality is, and I see the truth as being what's consistent with reality, that reality not only being material,
Mhm.
um, that it's important for them to learn those skills. So, although we didn't talk about education at ARC, actually that was my suggestion for something maybe for next year to
What would
talk
you like to see discussed?
in terms of education.
Yeah.
So, last year I was involved in rewriting K through 12 science standards for the National Association of Scholars. And what we produced was called the Franklin Standards, named after Benjamin Franklin, who was really quite a good scientist. And when I was asked to join this project, I jumped at the chance. And I jumped at the chance because my students now are dumber than they used to be. They neither have the breadth of knowledge, nor the depth of knowledge, nor the interest to know the truth, what true knowledge is. So I got involved with this project, and I realized that how my students learned science was being taught with something called the next generation science standards. And the next generation science standards emphasized equity. as the reason those science were written. Before that, the science standards were good too. After, but with the next generation standards, they by promoting equity, what they did was dumb down the curriculum enough so everybody could pass. Happened in the Ithaca City School District, which I have some experience with. My friends who are professors are so disappointed, science professors are so disappointed that their kids go to school and hate science. And that's because it's dumbed down so much. So, for example, this is an example a parent gave me. The kids are given an apple to cut in half, and the apple turns brown. And the kids are asked, why does the apple turn brown? I said, I don't know. And they said, make a hypothesis. I said, a hypothesis is an educated guess. I'm not educated. I don't know. So, in the style of the Franklin standards, where we give enough content, if a student cut an apple in half and it turned brown, say, why did it turn brown? I don't know. Well, let me tell you something. There's this invisible stuff in the air. It's called oxygen. And when that interacts with the apple, it turns brown. I wonder if we could test that anyway by putting the apple in an oxygen-free environment and see if it turns brown or not. Or, you know how some apples turn brown really quickly and some don't? I wonder if they have antioxidants in them that we can isolate and test, like St. Georgie isolated ascorbic acid from peppers, something that prevented browning.
Hmm.
And actually, when St. Georgie first isolated this thing, it was a sugar. So he gave it the name Os, but he didn't like every sugar, but he didn't know anything more about it. So he submitted the paper and he gave it the name Ignos because he was ignorant
Hmm.
about any other properties. And Hardin, the editor, said, you can't call it Ignos. And St. George said, fine, call it God knows. And so Hardin didn't want to put up with a sense of humor anymore and called it hexuronic acid because it had 6 carbons. And then it turned out that it prevented scurvy. So it had anti-scorbutic acid activity. So it was given the name ascorbic acid.
Hmm.
And now Bruce Fabry calls it vitamin C.
That's a great, love it.
So if there's enough content, and if
Yeah.
I mean, the teachers don't know this to tell the students, and so in the beginning it's called inquiry-based learning, which would be a great thing if there was enough content. And then when they're in high school, they learn about models, particularly in terms of climate change. But they don't have enough information to test if you put garbage in, do you get garbage out?
Hmm.
So they're just taught essentially if the consensus says the model is correct, then it's correct.
Yeah, it's the parrot uh
Yeah,
experience.
yeah. And if you don't think humans are any more special than parrots, why not teach them that way?
I think we're still like evolving from our education system coming out of like Russia in the 1800s or something, right?
I had a great education. I love I love classes, I love school, I love the teachers. I just
Yeah, you fit into it well, the academic world.
actually I went to what was called an experimental junior high school at the time. It gave no grades. You wrote a contract with your teacher what you would do. Um, they mixed together social studies and English as if there's no boundaries.
Yeah,
It was perfect for me. Since then, they got rid of it, unfortunately, I think. But
yeah,
I mean, there's some people do very, very well with a lot of structure, and
yeah.
some
I
people
I am
do.
definitely not one.
Yeah.
I did not fit into traditional academia at all. I most of my education happened like post academics in the other world per se. But yeah. Well, Randy, I'm thinking good to wrap it up actually.
This was great seeing you and talking to
Yeah.
you.
It's
Yeah,
amazing. I want to connect with you outside the auspices of an interview because I want to connect on
good.
a whole bunch of other things that I don't want to post. But yeah, I'll connect with you after I get off this interview here. But thank you very much.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, thank you.
and I
Thank
after
you,
your
Rudy.
paper comes out on you correcting Maxwell's hypothesis there, maybe you'd be up for explaining it.
Sure.
It'd
My
be
pleasure.
incredible.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Okay, Randy. Well,
All right.
I'll let you go. And
Give my best to your family.
yeah, same. Thank you so
Thanks.
much for everything, and I'll talk to you soon.
Good. Bye-bye, Rudy. Thank you.
Bye bye.